Blood stained the snow as Madeline drew her final, ragged breath. Banished and utterly broken by her fated mate, she had nothing left to give. Yet, when she stumbled upon a dying stranger in the frost, she sacrificed her last spark of life, unaware she had just saved a king. Rejection is rarely the poetic tragedy written about in old pack lore. In reality, it is a clinical, visceral tearing of the nervous system. Madeline Harper knew this better than anyone. As a trauma nurse for the Silver Ridge Pack in the isolated Cascade Mountains of Oregon, she had treated the rare, unfortunate souls who lost their mates. She had seen the way their veins darkened, how their immune systems collapsed, and how their inner wolves simply curled up and starved to death in the recesses of their minds. She just never expected to be the one on the examination table. It happened on a bitter Tuesday evening in late November. Madeline had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the Pack's private clinic alongside Dr. Silas Hemlock. She was exhausted, smelling of antiseptic and stale coffee, but her heart had fluttered with the quiet, secret joy of knowing she was going home to Caleb. Caleb Weston was the alpha heir of Silver Ridge. He was also her fated mate. They had discovered the bond in secret 3 months prior. Caleb had insisted on keeping it quiet until after the winter solstice, claiming he needed time to prepare his traditional, elitist father for the reality that the future alpha was mated to a lowly pack nurse. Madeline, blinded by the euphoric chemical cocktail of the mate bond, had believed him. Instead, she walked into the pack's central gathering hall to find Caleb standing beside Chloe Davies, the daughter of a wealthy neighboring alpha. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. Caleb didn't look at Madeline with love or even regret. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely corporate. He had made a political calculation, and Madeline was a liability. I, Caleb Weston, future alpha of Silver Ridge, reject you, Madeline Harper, as my fated mate, he announced, his voice booming over the stunned murmurs of the gathered crowd. You are not fit to lead. You are dismissed from my bloodline, and by the laws of my father, banished from these lands, for the disharmony your presence will now cause. The words weren't just a social humiliation. They were a biological weapon. Madeline collapsed to the hardwood floor instantly. It felt as though a serrated hunting knife had been driven into her chest, carving out her lungs. She gasped, but no air filled her screaming body. The invisible, golden tether that had connected her soul to Caleb's snapped violently, the recoil shattering her mental shields. Her inner wolf let out an agonizing, blood-curdling howl before collapsing into silence. Chloe smirked, her arm wrapped tightly around Caleb's. Caleb simply turned his back. Escort her to the perimeter, he ordered his enforcers. She has 1 hour before the border wards treat her as a rogue. They didn't even let her pack a bag. 2 enforcers, men she had treated for lacerations and fevers just weeks prior, dragged her by her arms out into the freezing night. The temperature was plunging below zero, a freak blizzard rolling over the Pacific Northwest. Madeline was wearing nothing but her thin blue scrubs and a light fleece jacket. They left her at the edge of the tree line, 10 miles from the nearest human highway. Sorry, Maddie, one of the enforcers muttered, looking away in shame. Alpha's orders? Keep walking north. Don't look back. As the heavy iron gates of the territory slammed shut behind her, the full weight of her reality set in. Without the mate bond, her supernatural healing factor was already plummeting. Her wolf was comatose, dying from the severed connection. Without her wolf to regulate her body temperature, the lethal cold of the blizzard began to bite into her skin with terrifying speed. She was going to die out here. Madeline staggered into the dense, snow-covered forest, her sneakers sinking deep into the powder. Every step was a monumental effort. Her chest burned with the agonizing phantom pain of the broken bond. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could even fall. She wrapped her arms around her shivering torso, her mind slipping into the dangerous, sluggish haze of hypothermia. Hours bled into one another. The world became a dizzying swirl of white snow and black pine trunks. She tripped over hidden roots, scraping her knees raw, the blood sluggish and dark. Her hands were numb, her fingers turning a sickly shade of blue. She knew the medical signs of death. First came the shivering, then the apathy, and finally, the terminal burrowing instinct. She just wanted to sleep. A soft, snow-covered hollow at the base of an ancient oak tree looked so inviting. Madeline sank to her knees, her vision darkening at the edges. She closed her eyes, ready to let the cold take her, ready to escape the suffocating agony of Caleb's betrayal. But then, the wind shifted. Through the scent of pine and ozone, a sharp, metallic odor hit her nose. It was raw. It was violent. Blood. Real, fresh blood. And beneath it, the unmistakable, acidic tang of silver nitrate. A healer's instinct is a curse. Even as her own heart slowed to a fragile, erratic rhythm, Madeline's eyes snapped open. Adrenaline, weak but demanding, forced her to push up from the snow. She crawled toward the scent. The wind howled, whipping snow into her eyes, but she dragged herself forward over a snowbank. When she tumbled down the other side, she landed in a scene of absolute carnage. The snow here wasn't white. It was painted crimson and black. Scattered across the clearing were the bodies of 4 large rogue wolves, their throats torn open. But Madeline's eyes bypassed them, locking onto the massive form slumped against a boulder at the center of the massacre. It was a wolf, but unlike any she had ever seen. He was colossal, easily twice the size of Caleb's wolf form, with a coat as black as a starless night. But the magnificent creature was dying. He was breathing in shallow, wet rasps. 3 heavy-caliber bullet wounds marred his flank, the surrounding fur singed and smoking with the toxic reaction of weaponized silver. A massive laceration ran down his shoulder, exposing bone. The silver was poisoning his bloodstream, halting his natural healing process. Madeline didn't know this wolf. He was a stranger, likely a wanderer caught in a rogue ambush. But as she looked at him, she didn't see a stranger. She saw another living creature dying alone in the cold, discarded and broken, just like her. She dragged her frozen, uncooperative body across the bloody snow until she collapsed against his massive side. The heat radiating from him was intense, a feverish, dying fire. The great black wolf cracked an eye open, even glazed with pain. His eye was a terrifying, mesmerizing shade of liquid gold. He let out a low, rumbling growl, a warning, demanding she stay away. "Shh," Madeline whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Her bloody, frost-bitten fingers brushed against his coarse fur. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She could feel the silver coursing through his veins. It was acting like battery acid, destroying him from the inside out. Any normal wolf would have been dead an hour ago. The fact that he was still breathing spoke to a terrifying, ancient power. But power wasn't enough to stop the silver. Madeline made a choice. She had been rejected. Her life was over. The cold was already claiming her brain, and her own wolf was practically dead. But she still possessed her healer's aura, the innate, cellular energy that allowed her to mend tissue and draw out toxins. Using it now, in her decimated state, would drain the very last drops of her life force. It would be a fatal transfer. She didn't care. If her life was going to end tonight, she refused to let it end as a victim of Caleb's cruelty. She would end it on her own terms. She would die a healer. Madeline pressed both of her hands directly over the deepicus, silver-laced bullet wound on the wolf's chest. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, rattling breath, and reached inward. She found the small, dying spark of her wolf spirit and did the unthinkable. She broke her own containment walls, forcing her soul to bleed out into her hands. A faint, ethereal blue light began to glow from her palms. The black wolf flinched violently, a whine escaping his jaws. He tried to pull away, his golden eyes widening in shock as he realized what she was doing. He could feel her dying to save him. He nudged her weakly with his heavy snout, trying to break her concentration, trying to push her away. "Stay still," she breathed, tears finally breaking past her frozen lashes. "Just live. Someone has to survive tonight." She pushed harder, forcing the blue light deep into his wounds. The pain was indescribable. It felt as though she were pulling the silver poisoning into her own veins. She gasped, coughing up a spatter of dark blood onto the snow, but she didn't break contact. Beneath her hands, The miracle of her sacrifice took hold. The smoking edges of the wounds began to cool. The silver toxins were neutralized by her pure life force, evaporating into the frigid air. The shredded muscle and torn flesh began to knit together at a supernatural speed. As the wolf's breathing deepened and stabilized, Madeline's grew shallower. The cold had finally reached her core. The blue light flickered, then died out completely. She had nothing left. Her hands slipped from his fur, leaving bloody streaks behind. Madeline slumped backward into the snow, the world fading into a quiet, peaceful gray. The pain of the rejection was gone. The freezing cold was gone. There was only a heavy, comforting numbness. As her vision tunneled, the massive black wolf shifted. The sound of cracking bones and reshaping tissue echoed in the clearing. Where the beast had laid, a man now knelt over her. He was massive, his chest bare to the blizzard, radiating an oppressive, overwhelming aura of absolute authority that made the very air vibrate. Even through her fading consciousness, Madeline felt an instinctual urge to submit. He gathered her broken, freezing body into his arms, with startling gentleness. "Why?" a deep, gravelly voice demanded, filled with a frantic urgency. "Why did you do that, little wolf?" Madeline couldn't speak. Her eyes drifted to his right shoulder. There, branded into the tanned skin, was a distinct, intricate mark, a howling wolf skull, wreathed in black flames. Every pup in North America knew that mark from the history books. It wasn't just a pack tattoo. It was the royal crest, the obsidian crest. The man holding her wasn't a wandering rogue. He was Wyatt Crestwood, the Alpha King of the Western Hemisphere, the most ruthless, powerful, and feared werewolf in existence. And she had just bled her own soul dry to save him. A tiny, breathless sigh escaped Madeline's lips. Her eyes rolled back, her head falling limply against Wyatt's massive chest as the last beat of her heart echoed in the silent, snow-covered forest. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended upon the frozen clearing. Wyatt Crestwood, the Alpha King of the Western Hemisphere, knelt in the blood-stained snow, cradling the lifeless body of a stranger. For a man who had lived over 3 centuries, who had waged territorial wars and ruthlessly crushed rebellions, death was a familiar companion. But this was different. The tiny, fragile woman in his arms hadn't died in battle. She had poured the very essence of her soul into his ruptured veins, neutralizing the weaponized silver that his own elite healing factor couldn't fight. She had traded her final heartbeat for his. Wyatt pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat. Her skin was like marble, freezing to the touch. Nothing. No pulse. A primal, terrifying roar tore from Wyatt's chest, shattering the quiet of the forest. The sound carried a concussive wave of alpha command, so potent that the surrounding pine trees shuddered, shedding heavy coats of snow. "No," Wyatt growled, his golden eyes blazing in the darkness. "I do not accept this debt. You do not have permission to die." He shifted his grip, laying her flat against the snow. He could smell the lingering, putrid stench of a severed mate bond clinging to her aura. Someone had rejected her. Someone had broken her spirit so completely that she had wandered into a blizzard seeking a quiet grave, only to stumble upon an ambush meant for a king. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He brought his right wrist to his mouth and sank his own fangs into his flesh. He tore a deep, jagged gash over his radial artery. Royal blood, thick, impossibly dark, and thrumming with ancient, regenerative magic, welled to the surface. He pried Madeline's blue lips apart and pressed his bleeding wrist against her mouth, forcing the blood down her throat. "Drink," he commanded, his voice layered with the absolute authority of the crown. Beat, breathe, command. To a normal wolf, a direct infusion of king's blood would be too volatile, causing a fatal system overload. But Madeline was empty. She was a hollow vessel, drained of her own life force. As the royal blood hit her system, Wyatt placed his massive hands over her sternum and began brutal, rhythmic chest compressions. 1, 2, 3. Crack. A rib gave way under his immense strength, but he didn't stop. "Come back," he snarled. On the 15th compression, A violent spasm arched Madeline's spine. She gagged, choking on the metallic taste of his blood, and took a sudden, agonizing gasp of air. Her heart, jump-started by the ancient magic and sheer force of his alpha command, slammed into a frantic, erratic rhythm. She was alive, but she was entirely unstable. High above, the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades broke through the howling blizzard. A massive, matte black military helicopter cut through the storm, a blinding searchlight sweeping over the trees until it locked onto the bloody clearing. Before the aircraft even touched the ground, the side door slammed open. Declan Hayes, Wyatt's beta and commander of the Royal Guard, leaped into the snow, an assault rifle strapped to his chest. Close behind him was Dr. Arthur Sterling, the chief royal physician. "Sire!" Declan shouted over the deafening roar of the rotors, his eyes darting to the slaughtered rogue wolves before landing on the king. "We lost your tracker signal when the silver hit you. Are you?" "I am fine," Wyatt barked, his voice leaving no room for debate. He gathered Madeline effortlessly against his chest, shielding her from the biting wind. "Get the trauma bay ready. Now." Dr. Sterling rushed forward, scanning the pale, limp woman in the king's arms. "Sire, who is she? What happened?" She extracted the silver. "She burned out her own core to do it," Wyatt said, striding toward the helicopter. "And she is suffering from a severed mate bond. Her wolf is comatose." Sterling's face went pale. "A severed bond and extreme hypothermia?" "Sire, her neurological pathways are likely collapsing. We need her in a hyperbaric chamber immediately." Wyatt stepped onto the chopper. "Then fly us to the Citadel. Tell the pilot if we don't make it to Jackson Hole in under an hour, I'll tear his wings off myself." The flight to the Obsidian Citadel, Wyatt's heavily fortified estate, nestled in the remote mountains of Wyoming, was a blur of controlled chaos. Madeline was strapped to a gurney in the back of the aircraft. Intravenous lines were jammed into her arms, pumping heated fluids and high-grade wolfsbane extract to shock her dormant immune system. Wyatt refused to leave her side. He sat on the steel bench beside the gurney, his massive hand wrapping around her small, freezing fingers. He was ignoring his own injuries. The bullet holes in his chest had already closed into angry red scars thanks to Madeline's sacrifice. But he was still exhausted. Declan approached quietly, handing the king a heavy wool blanket to drape over his bare shoulders. "Sire, my men secured the perimeter where you were ambushed. The rogues were carrying military-grade silver rounds. This was a highly coordinated assassination attempt. Someone knew your travel route." Wyatt's eyes never left Madeline's face. "Find out who funded them. Tear the Western packs apart if you have to." "Understood," Declan nodded. "And the girl?" "We ran her fingerprints through the National Registry while you were in the air." Declan held up a glowing tablet. "Madeline Harper, 26. She's a registered trauma nurse for the Silver Ridge Pack in Oregon. Her alpha is Gregory Weston." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Silver Ridge. That's barely 20 miles from where I was attacked." "Yes, sire. And according to the registry, she was marked as an active pack member as of this morning. But her scent, she smells like a rogue. Stripped of pack protections." Wyatt leaned closer to Madeline, inhaling deeply. Beneath the smell of antiseptic and his own blood, he caught the faint, bitter scent of an alpha's rejection. Not just an alpha heir, the scent of arrogance and cedarwood. "She wasn't just banished," Wyatt rumbled, the sound vibrating through the metal floor of the helicopter. "She was rejected by her fated mate, stripped of her rank, and thrown into a blizzard to freeze to death." Dr. Sterling, who was monitoring Madeline's vitals, looked up in horror. "But she's a healer. A latent high-tier healer based on what she did for you, discarding an asset like her. It's not just cruel. It's astronomical stupidity." "It is treason," Wyatt corrected, his golden eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Silver Ridge is under my domain. If Alpha Weston is allowing his bloodline to discard pack members to die in the snow, he has broken the ancient laws of sanctuary." Wyatt looked down at the woman who had saved him. Her breathing was still shallow, her face hauntingly pale. But the king's blood in her veins was holding the Reaper at bay. She had been thrown away like garbage by a lesser wolf. "Keep her alive, Arthur," Wyatt ordered, his voice terrifyingly calm. Because when she wakes up, she is going to watch me burn her former pack to the ground. For 3 days, Madeline remained trapped in a dreamless void. She floated in a warm, dark ocean, untethered from pain. Occasionally, a deep, rhythmic thrumming would echo through the water, a grounding heartbeat that kept her from drifting away entirely. She didn't know it, but that heartbeat belonged to the Alpha King, who spent hours sitting silently beside her medical pod in the depths of the Citadel. Dr. Sterling had placed her in an advanced, medical-grade stasis tank. Suspended in a viscous, oxygen-rich fluid, Madeline's shattered nervous system was slowly being knitted back together. The severed mate bond with Caleb had left catastrophic psychological and physical scarring. But Wyatt's royal blood was acting as an aggressive bridge, forcing her inner wolf to regenerate. On the 4th morning, Wyatt stood in the observation room, overlooking the medical bay, his arms crossed over his chest. He wore a tailored black suit, exuding an aura of lethal sophistication. "Her vitals are stabilizing, sire," Dr. Sterling reported, handing Wyatt a holographic chart. "The king's blood has assimilated perfectly. In fact, it's unprecedented. Usually, foreign alpha blood causes severe tissue rejection, but her biology is accepting it as if it recognizes you." Wyatt stared through the reinforced glass at Madeline's serene face. A strange, primal possessiveness had taken root in his chest the moment she had touched him in the snow. "Explain." Dr. Sterling adjusted his glasses nervously. "Well, there is a phenomenon in our lore: false bonds. Sometimes, two wolves are highly compatible biologically, and proximity triggers a false mate response. It feels real, but it's fragile. When her former mate rejected her, it shattered the false bond. But her acceptance of your blood, sire, I believe her true mate bond, is attempting to anchor to you." Wyatt's breath hitched imperceptibly. He had lived over 300 years without a mate. He had accepted that the moon goddess had cursed him to rule alone. To find out that his mate was a broken, banished nurse from a minor pack, it defied all logic. "Keep her safe," Wyatt commanded, turning away from the glass. The possessiveness in his chest flared into a raging inferno of protective fury. He had a mate, and someone had dared to hurt her. He strode out of the medical wing and down the obsidian corridors to the war room, where Declan was waiting. "Are the transports ready?" Wyatt asked. "Yes, sire. 3 heavily armed tactical teams. We leave for Oregon in 10 minutes, Declan confirmed. "I also intercepted the communications from Silver Ridge. They are hosting their annual Winter Solstice Gala tonight. The neighboring packs are in attendance." "Perfect," Wyatt said, a cruel, predatory smile touching his lips. "It is time for a royal audit." The Silver Ridge Gathering Hall was a masterclass in rustic opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted log ceilings, casting a warm glow over the hundreds of elite pack members and visiting dignitaries in attendance. Champagne flowed freely, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. At the center of the room stood Caleb Weston, dressed in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the future alpha. On his arm was Chloe Davies, radiant in a shimmering silver gown. They were accepting congratulations from a line of sycophants. "You made the right choice, son," Alpha Gregory Weston, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard, said as he clapped Caleb on the back. "The Davies pack brings a lucrative lumber contract to our borders. That Harper girl, she was a weak link. A distraction," Caleb smirked, sipping his champagne. "She was just a nurse, father. I needed a Luna who understands power. Madeline was too soft. I doubt she even made it past the tree line in that storm." Chloe giggled, leaning into Caleb. "It's for the best. The weak are culled by the winter. It's the way of our kind." Suddenly, the string quartet stopped playing. A jarring, agonizing screech of a violin bow dragged across strings echoed through the silent room. The heavy, 12-foot oak doors of the gathering hall didn't just open. They were violently blown off their iron hinges. The massive doors splintered into pieces, crashing onto the polished hardwood floor and sending guests screaming and scrambling backward. Through the swirling snow and debris stepped a nightmare. 50 members of the Royal Guard, clad in tactical black armor bearing the flaming skull of the obsidian crest, flooded the room in perfect, lethal synchronization. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their combined auras forced half the room to their knees in immediate submission. Then, the king entered. Wyatt Crestwood walked slowly down the center of the hall. The air pressure in the room plummeted. The sheer weight of his alpha aura was suffocating, forcing the breath out of the lungs of every wolf present. Caleb's knees buckled, and he barely managed to stay standing, breaking into a cold sweat. Alpha Gregory Weston pushed through the terrified crowd, his face pale with sheer terror. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "Why, Your Majesty, Alpha King Wyatt, we had no warning of your arrival. We are honored." Silence. Wyatt's voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in the bones of everyone in the room. Wyatt stopped a few feet away from the Weston family. His golden eyes locked onto Caleb, pinning the younger wolf in place like an insect under glass. "I am conducting a royal audit of the Silver Ridge Pack," Wyatt stated, pulling off his leather gloves finger by finger. "Bring me your registry. I am looking for a specific citizen." Gregory scrambled to his feet, snapping his fingers at an aide, who frantically brought over a leather-bound ledger. "Of course, sire. Anyone you need. We are your loyal servants." Wyatt didn't take the book. He kept his eyes on Caleb. "I am looking for a trauma nurse. Madeline Harper." The color completely drained from Caleb's face. The champagne flute in his hand slipped, shattering on the floor. Chloe gasped, stepping behind Caleb instinctively. "Sire," Gregory stammered, confusion masking his fear. "Madeline Harper is. She is no longer a member of this pack. She was found lacking and banished 4 days ago." "Banished," Wyatt repeated, the word tasting like venom. "A healer of her caliber, thrown out into a blizzard without supplies or protection." "By whose authority?" "By mine, Your Majesty," Caleb managed to say, puffing out his chest in a desperate, foolish attempt to look strong. "She was my fated mate, but she was weak, unfit to be a Luna. I rejected her, to protect the strength of my bloodline, and secured a stronger alliance for the pack." A terrifying, chilling silence fell over the hall. Wyatt moved so fast that human eyes couldn't track him. In a fraction of a second, his hand was wrapped around Caleb's throat, lifting the alpha heir 2 feet off the ground. Caleb kicked and choked, clawing uselessly at the king's impenetrable grip. "Weak?" Wyatt whispered, his voice a lethal promise. "That woman dragged herself through a blizzard with a severed soul to save my life. She absorbed a lethal dose of weaponized silver into her own veins to keep my heart beating. She possesses more strength in her little finger than your entire pathetic bloodline." Gasps erupted around the room. The Alpha King owed his life to the banished nurse. The political implications were catastrophic. "She is under the absolute protection of the crown," Wyatt declared, his voice booming over the terrified crowd. He threw Caleb to the ground like a broken doll. Caleb coughed violently, gasping for air as Chloe screamed. Wyatt looked down at the disgraced heir. "By royal decree, I strip you of your title, your rank, and your inheritance. You are nothing." He turned his burning gaze to Alpha Gregory. "And you allowed this atrocity in your territory. Silver Ridge is hereby dissolved. Your lands, your assets, and your people now belong directly to the Obsidian Citadel." Gregory fell to his knees, weeping. The guests were frozen in absolute horror. In 5 minutes, the king had dismantled an empire over a single broken heart. Wyatt turned on his heel, his dark coat billowing behind him. "Clean this place up," he ordered Declan. "I need to get back to my mate." Warmth. It was the first sensation to pierce through the endless, floating dark. Madeline's eyelashes fluttered, feeling impossibly heavy. The biting, agonizing frost that had seeped into her very marrow was gone, replaced by a deep, thrumming heat that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She opened her eyes, squinting against the soft, amber lighting of a sprawling, high-tech medical suite. She wasn't in the snow. She wasn't in the modest, cramped clinic of the Silver Ridge Pack. She was lying in a plush, heated recovery bed, her body dressed in a soft silk gown. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm, and a complex array of monitors tracked her vitals with silent, rhythmic precision. "Take it slow, Miss Harper," a gentle voice cautioned. Madeline turned her head to see an older man in a pristine white coat reviewing a holographic chart. Dr. Arthur Sterling offered her a reassuring smile. Where am I?" Madeline's voice was a raspy whisper. She expected the agonizing, suffocating pain of her severed mate Bond to crush her chest the moment she spoke. But the pain was absent. Instead, there was a strange, vibrating energy humming beneath her skin. "You are safe within the Obsidian Citadel," Dr. Sterling explained, adjusting his glasses. "You suffered massive cellular trauma and extreme hypothermia. Furthermore, your heart underwent severe Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, what human medicine refers to as stress-induced broken heart syndrome triggered by the violent severing of a bond. We actually had to consult the trauma protocols of Dr. Harrison Caldwell, a leading cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic, to adapt a human stabilization method for your lichen physiology. You were clinically gone, Madeline." Madeline swallowed hard, the memories of the blizzard and Caleb's cold, corporate rejection rushing back. "The Black Wolf," she breathed, panic suddenly spiking her heart rate. "The Silver. Did he? He is entirely unharmed, thanks to your reckless, miraculous sacrifice." A new voice rumbled from the doorway. The air in the room shifted instantly. The atmospheric pressure dropped, growing heavy and thick, with an intoxicating scent of petrichor, dark amber, and raw, untamed power. Wyatt Crestwood stepped into the medical bay. He was no longer the dying, blood-soaked beast in the snow. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he looked every inch the ruthless, immortal monarch the history books described. His golden eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made Madeline's newly repaired heart skip a beat. Dr. Sterling bowed, respectfully, and quickly exited the room, leaving them completely alone. Madeline instinctively pulled the heavy duvet up to her chin, her mind reeling. You're the Alpha King, Wyatt Crestwood." "I am," Wyatt said, stepping slowly toward the edge of her bed. He didn't project his terrifying aura of command. Instead, he reined it in, approaching her with the careful, deliberate movements one might use with a startled wild bird. "And you are Madeline Harper, the trauma nurse who poured her own soul into a dying stranger. I thought you were just a rogue," she whispered, her eyes darting to the faint, jagged scar on his chest that peered through his unbuttoned collar, the exact spot where she had forced her healing magic. "If you had known I was the king, would you have left me to freeze?" he asked, a faint, genuine smirk touching the corner of his mouth. "No," she answered honestly. "A patient is a patient, but I shouldn't be alive. When Caleb rejected me, my inner wolf went dormant. She was dying. When I used my aura on you, I felt her flatline. How am I breathing right now?" Wyatt sat in the leather chair beside her bed. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand gently enveloping her small, pale fingers. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up Madeline's arm. It wasn't the chemical, frantic buzz she had felt with Caleb. This felt like the earth, settling after an earthquake. It felt like an ancient, permanent gravity. Madeline gasped, her eyes flying wide open as her dormant inner wolf suddenly roared to life in the back of her mind. But her wolf wasn't weak or broken anymore. She was radiant, infused with a dark, regal power that demanded respect. "Because Caleb Weston was a false bond," Wyatt explained, his voice a low, soothing gravel, "a biological anomaly based on proximity and compatibility, but fragile enough to be severed by a coward's ambition. When you died in the snow, I refused to let you go. I fed you my blood, Madeline. I forced your heart to beat again." Madeline stared at him, the reality of the situation crashing over her. King's blood is lethal to an unbonded wolf. It burns them from the inside out. "Unless," Wyatt murmured, leaning closer, his golden eyes filled with a possessive, ancient warmth. "The wolf is my true, fated mate. Your biology didn't just accept my blood. It welcomed it. It anchored us. Tears pricked Madeline's eyes. The betrayal she had suffered at Silver Ridge felt like a distant, fading nightmare, eclipsed by the blinding reality of the man sitting before her, Caleb, the Pack. Silver Ridge no longer exists as an independent territory, Wyatt stated, his tone shifting into something cold and absolute. I paid them a visit while you were in stasis. Caleb Weston has been stripped of his rank, his inheritance, and his pride. He is a disgraced outcast, and his father's lands now belong to the crown. No one discards what is mine and lives to boast of it. He didn't kill them. He completely dismantled their legacy, rendering Caleb exactly what he had tried to make Madeline powerless and irrelevant. A profound sense of closure washed over her. She didn't need Caleb to suffer physical pain. Knowing he had lost the very power he betrayed her for was justice enough. You did that. For me? She asked, her voice trembling. Wyatt brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss against her skin. I would burn the entire continent to ash for you, Madeline. You saved my life. Now, I intend to spend the rest of my immortal existence making sure no one ever makes you feel disposable again. As Wyatt's lips lingered on her hand, the golden tether of their true mate bond snapped firmly into place. It wasn't a chain. It was a shield. Madeline leaned back against the pillows, the phantom pains of her past completely erased. She had walked into the blizzard expecting a cold, lonely grave, but she had walked out of it holding the heart of a king. Rejection is not always the end of a bloodline. Sometimes it is the violent clearing of a path for destiny. Madeline Harper bled her soul dry for a dying stranger, only to awaken as the Luna Queen of the Western Hemisphere. She transformed her deepest trauma into her greatest triumph, proving that the most unbreakable crowns are forged not from gold, but from the scars of survival.